Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Slingshot from levees.org, a podcast. And our mission is to offer coverage and commentary on global events which matter most to you, our listeners. And today we're here to discuss President Biden's pardon of his son, Hunter Biden. I'm going to stop because I'm not sure if we have Rudy. Okay, we do. We do have you. Okay. Okay. Okay, Landry, thank you for fixing that glitch. So, you all know me, Sandy Rosenthal, and today I'm thrilled and delighted to be joined by Rudy Vorkapik and Stuart Lowe. So, as all of you know, um, President Joe Biden has pardoned his son, Hunter Biden. This
What?
has been met with a lot of criticism on both sides of the aisle. And so we are going to spend the next half hour talking about that pardon and what does it mean and why should we all be talking about it? So, Stuart, how about you start?
Okay. Um, I personally, I was not greatly invested in the story, uh, given the fact that the incoming president has pardoned so many people for so many things. You just take one case, for example, the incoming um, ambassador to France, Charles Kushner, had similarly sordid criminality on his record, and he's been pardoned, and he's going to be the ambassador to France. That's just one. There stands a strong chance that thousands of people who desecrated the Capitol and committed insurrection, that they are going to be pardoned. So while I understand this looks like a nepotistic move that demeans the presidency of the United States, demeans the office of president, I didn't take it as seriously as the media. The Washington Post had a front page or front of internet posting with all six of their columnists, the majority of their columnists, all weighing in on this. And I don't see it as such a big story, and it will fade from memory pretty quickly. Now, the only thing that worries me is what happened after Ford's pardon of Nixon. That did apparently come back to haunt Ford in the election, 18 months later. That may happen to the Democrats. There may be some lingering resentment, but who knows? It's hard to pinpoint why people voted the way they did in this election. So, seeing lots of disparate analysis, nobody really understands how it came out the way it did. I have some thoughts about that, but that really expands the scope of this. So that I personally just not that invested in it. It was a father taking care of some nasty business for his son. And I'll add to that, we can be very certain the Republicans would go after this with gusto on every single iota that they could bring up on Hunter Biden. So it was incumbent upon the incumbent, if you pardon the pun, to go and wipe the slate completely clean from any charges or any federal charges at all, not to perform a selective pardon. So I don't hold that against him either.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you,
Well,
Stuart. Rudy, what do you think?
well, here's what I think. I think that while it's a story that should go away, I think we've learned over the last, well, certainly since MAGA has taken over the Republican Party, which just really doesn't exist anymore in any form that I've ever known it in my lifetime. But what we know from what they do, they never let anything go. So they will repeat this and repeat this and repeat this, time memoriam, and make it part of the public consciousness forevermore. And this will be the damning moment of the Democrats claiming legal superiority or superiority over the issue of justice. And and there is no doubt in my mind that they will absolutely pound this for time and memoriam. I truly do wish. Oh, couple that with the fact that the Democratic Party, which again, I could say the same thing about the Democratic Party these days as I just said about the Republican Party, that is so very different than what I remember. The spirited, in your face, both of them going after each other, at each other in a different sort of way, a more reasoned way, if you will, even maybe not always, but certainly more than we have now. But Democrats certainly will not defend what happened as much as Republicans will pound what happened.
That's true.
So what Democrats need to be doing is standing up every single what they needed to be doing from the presidential election since Kamala Harris took over, in my humble opinion, is to be up there every day pounding back just as hard as the MAGA Republicans pound on their issues, pounding back on the stupidity of the reasoning that the other side is bringing, because that's generally how I find it. Now, both sides, let's be honest, are often guilty of stupidity. There's no, well, I can't say one side, they're even. That's not that. I'm not saying that for sure. But the point being that one of the things I wish President Biden would have done, was to literally, after the plea deal for his son fell apart, put together by a Republican that the Republicans chose, after that fell apart, and he got a deal that was right in line with the same kind of deal that everyone in his situation had received. And they were talking about the weaponization of government. They weaponized the government. That special prosecutor withdrew the plea. At that point, President Biden absolutely should have said, you know what? This is a miscarriage of justice. This is the weaponization of the Justice Department. And yes, I am going to pardon him because of this. If he would have done that, it would have been a strong argument in his favor, and not something that in my humble opinion, I believe that he was going to do the entire time. And I'd like to speak more about that as well. But
Wait,
what do you
and
think
and
about
and you
that?
shall. I'm going to jump in and say I agree with you in that the Democrat should scream a little louder. Miscarriage of justice. My recollection is that when Biden was found guilty, you didn't see the same screaming weaponization of the government. You didn't hear the same thing that the Republicans did when Trump was found guilty. You didn't hear the same, you heard it, but it wasn't as loud and it wasn't as in your face. And maybe, and so Rudy, I think if I'm understanding you right, you're saying that they should have screamed louder. We need to ramp up the volume a bit.
Without question.
And there's no, so, and there, do I think this was a witch hunt going after Hunter? Well, but let me back up a little. Hunter is no angel. Okay, and I think we can get that off the board. He's a bad apple.
All right. No, I'm just
A
kidding.
bad
He
apple.
carries a big staff, though. But go ahead.
Bad apple. No doubt about that. But was this did they go after him for political reasons? Absolutely. And they did find him guilty on, and I'm not an attorney, but it did seem a little that they had to really work hard to get him. They had to find a way to get him, and they did. You get enough attorneys in a room, they're going to make us all feel guilty. Even Mother Teresa can be found guilty of something.
Even Martha Stewart.
Even Martha Stewart, boy,
Nicely
that's
said.
is that another? That'd be another great other show. If anyone's read a book or thinking about reading it. But so back to, so yeah, I agree that the Democrats need to ramp up their hollering a lot, and because of what happened. And it's interesting you said, but you believe that President Biden had intended all along to pardon him. Well, then
especially after he decided not to run. I think the day that he decided not to run was the day that he knew in his own mind that he was going to end up pardoning Hunter.
I'm not sure I agree with that. I would say
Okay,
it could have been the election. It could have been the election that changed his mind. But you're absolutely right. If he had done the pardon, it would be more palatable, more justifiable if he'd done it at an appropriate time, as you say. But the other point that you made absolutely is the other side of my coin of saying, I don't care that much. And I don't personally, but it really does deflate the Democrats' position, takes the wind out of their sails in any kind of pushback on Trump pardons. Now they can't say much of anything. It's a little bit like when the documents were discovered at Biden's house. Same thing. It's like, oh, really? Even though it was different, you can argue the nuance and the subtleties. And one not so subtle point was Biden immediately returned the documents that were found, as opposed to what our incoming president did. It didn't matter. The fact that they both had documents that they shouldn't have had at their personal residences took out a lot of the wind of the sails of the Democrats on being able to use that point as a defense. So absolutely, Rudy, you're absolutely on target with that. There goes that argument against pardons. And he responded to this by saying, "Oh, I may pardon everybody from January 6th." He may do that. And
He may.
what
He
can we
will.
say? What
He
can we
will.
say?
Right. And don't forget about, Paul Manafort. He pardoned Paul Manafort. He pardoned
Yeah.
Roger Stone. He
Right.
pardoned Michael Flynn. Who
Yes.
pleaded guilty.
Yes. Right.
All of these, there's no equal.
It's not a
even
balanced
close to
argument.
equal.
The arguments
No.
don't balance, but the fact remains, just this one pardon of this one high profile person who is in his family, it nullifies it greatly weakens their position, if not entirely nullifies it.
And
How
again,
much
goes
time?
right towards harming the entire country. Again,
How much time would Hunter actually have served? Likely.
That's an excellent question. I don't know that had been decided.
I don't believe it did, and I was under my impression was we were talking 12 months, maybe 18 max. Now, not that I would like going to prison, but we weren't talking 10 years here. And so should that matter? Anyway, I was just wondering if anyone had an idea on just how much time we were talking about.
I remember seeing 2 years, something
Okay.
up to 2 years, but that's not the point here.
No, it's not.
He's got a conviction. He's going to be sentenced. All of that's going to happen. If he was not pardoned, there would be other charges coming along. It'd be like Benghazi, just perpetually digging stuff up out of the
Right.
laptop. And there'd be new charges,
Right.
I think that's what Biden realized. That's why I'm saying it was the election that flipped him. Why the hell not? Now I lost. If Harris had won, there would be less, I think much less inclination of the Justice Department to go any further than they already had.
Oh, sure. I mean, it's still going to remain a Democratic administration, and that's not weaponization. That's just realization. That's just a leadership that's not going after a false prophecy here. I mean, what he did, and again, let's not sugarcoat it. Like Sandy said, Hunter Biden, he took every advantage of his father being president, and he profited off of it. And he was the son you probably don't want to introduce to your best friend's girl. Let's be honest. I mean, he has got a lot of issues, most of them bad, pretty much all of them bad.
Pretty much.
Pretty much all of them bad. Depends on what you're into, but you know what I'm saying. And the fact being that still what he was accused of, they never came up with the evidence. In my humble mind, it was just all so overblown and just that was weaponization in a classic definition.
Well, he literally failed to fill out a form correctly. That was one. That was the gun charge.
Well, when you're as messed up as he was.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
But there should be another form for that. All right. Yeah. No, it's very, very, very yeah, it's a ridiculous situation that now has captured the too much attention and again taken away from any kind of discussion about any kind of issues, which is always the aim of the of any politician. You know, I came up with a new word for politicians in my mind. If you take off the POL and politicians, it becomes lication. So I think it's more of liticians is what it becomes. That's what I'm thinking about. Liticians. So I think
A
that's what we
litician,
should just call them from now on. Is
liticians.
liticians.
I'm going to remember that one. So and one of the things I've heard the Republicans scream is this is unprecedented. This has never happened before where a president will pardon a member of his own family. Well, it turns out it's not unprecedented. It's happened many times in our history. I believe Washington pardoned a member of his family, and but much more recently was the first George Bush Senior. I
Yeah.
believe. Oh, wait a minute. No, excuse me. It was Clinton. Clinton pardoned his brother, Roger.
Roger Clinton, yeah.
Right. So it's not unprecedented. It's not like it's never been done before.
And
This is
again,
not unique.
Now, wouldn't you
if
like to be at that
if
party? Wouldn't you like
son-in-law
to be at that party with Hunter Biden and Roger Clinton? Now that would be a good news weekend.
yeah, with Billy Beer too.
And Billy Beer. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, um, it's Charles Kushner is family to Trump, pardoned right there, right
Great
there.
point. Great point.
Right.
Perfect point. That's it. I mean, that's true to true. But what they've done again is they've captured the narrative, and
Yeah.
they're being allowed to. And Democrats, you know, are there's too many of them, you know, just being too righteous, perhaps in this particular instance, to where they're kind of being subservient to the narrative and not
Mhm.
understanding, you know, that, you know, let's be honest, the big deal is a big deal, a little deal is a little deal, and what this kind of equates to is a little deal. I
Okay,
mean,
that's true. I agree with what your assessment of the Democrats, but I also believe we are seeing the cumulative effect, the long-term effect of the press having been normalized to Donald Trump. You know, the Overton window has been shifted way over to where now so many things that would have been deal breakers, unacceptable, unimaginable in the era, you know, when Howard Dean screamed and blew up his candidacy. The norms have been eroded for 8 to 10 years by this guy, and this is a cumulative effect. It's why the Washington Post and the Times jumped on the story, and they can't jump on a Trump story because it goes on all the time. There's just so much of it. As Steve Bannon said, and pardon the language, but flood the zone with
another guy who
shit.
got a pardon.
Yeah, another guy that got a pardon. He said that the strategy is flood the zone with shit. That's what he said. Excuse me
Absolutely,
for
and
the language.
and that is that there's no better way to put it, and it's probably the only thing I'll ever agree with the man on. But the point is that that is true, and you know they're throwing tennis balls, and the media. There's so many media outlets out there. There's so many of them trying to chase a new story or put a new spin on an old story
Mhm.
that you know they're chasing tennis balls. And
Yes.
they're just you're chasing their own tails, and
So
so
on
I
that
mean,
subject of the media, Rudy, you're absolutely right. And on that subject of the media, I've mentioned before that I was a bit despondent when I saw that 500,000 people had ended their subscriptions of the Washington Post, which
Mhm.
I felt was biting off our noses despite our faces. We need all our as much media as a broad band of media as we can possibly get. And I think that hurt rather than help. Did it send a message to the editor in chief? Yes. Or the owner?
the
Yes,
owner.
it did send a
I,
message.
I
But
don't
there are
know.
better ways to send a message than stopping the subscriptions. The Washington Post is a great newspaper. It's not
Mhm.
perfect, but it's a great newspaper. So I was sad to see that happen. I hope a lot of those people change their mind. But moving on, what about there's a lot more paid you pay to be a to receive news,
Subscriber.
online and yeah, subscribers. There are more of those now. They're small. Like a local example is the local New Orleans Lens, but
Hmm.
it's a fine outlet. It's a fine organization. They do great work. You have to pay for it, and it's not as well known. But do you think the world it will come to a world where there are a lot more of these, and will that help with the fact that media has been turned into a show?
Well, if I may,
Sure. Mm.
you know, one of the things that I see is as a potential savior for local community news, certainly is a movement lately, and a friend of mine in Chicago is a very big spearhead of this particular movement, and it's happened everywhere, but this is the one I'm most involved with and knowledgeable about. Newspapers would hire people from all over, and there was an unspoken rule. There was a rule that, you couldn't live where you reported, and
Okay.
you couldn't be part of the particular thing that you might be covering.
Okay.
And what a lot of independent and nonprofit um, uh, uh, media outlets are doing now is saying no, that's wrong, because you actually probably benefit more from having a person live in the community that they're reporting about, because they're there every day and they see it every day and they live with it every day and they talk to their neighbors every day and they see everybody at the coffee shop every day, and they have their pulse a little bit more on the happenings of the day. And a friend of mine I used to work with in Chicago has started a media outlet called the Block Club Chicago, and they make this happen. They do it exactly like this. They hire people, and they either want them from the area that they're covering, or they want them to live in the area that they're covering, because they want them to be a part of the community and enmeshed in it, and then to bring that personal perspective to the stores that they walk by, to the police that they see happen, to the accidents they see on the corner, to the art that they can snap with their phones, to the dog parks, to anything that is going on in the neighborhood. They can bring it to you almost instantaneously, which is an
Rudy, if I
entirely
may,
different. Hmm.
no, 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 because
Cheers.
because that means that those reporters have a dog in the fight, and that is
That's
against
the that's the
journalistic
that's the trad
integrity.
that's the traditional argument.
That's the
That is the
traditional argument,
traditional argument. That is the
which
traditional. And then
which
the outside of that is, you have an outsider who's not as familiar, missing a lot of what's just happening around the corner. And again, what happens is, in the spirit uh, uh, of online journalism, particularly, is that people intend to comment more, and so that story gets vetted almost immediately.
I don't have a good feeling about that.
Cheers.
However, I would be all right if it were what do you call it, disclosure.
Hmm.
Disclose
Of
that,
course.
this story is written by someone who's
Hmm.
it's a member of his or her or their community,
Hmm.
and then that would be okay if it was
Yeah.
right at the beginning of the article,
Right.
because I do, and I'll tell you where I think it's a maybe a sore spot with me. But when I was trying to get the truth out, I was leading a team of people to get the truth out
Right.
about the levee failures, and I would write to a reporter and say, you referred to the flooding as from Katrina when it's not.
Right.
It is because of engineering failure. You'd be If I had a nickel for every time a reporter said to me, "Well, I don't have a dog in that fight." And my response would be, "Well, of course you don't have a dog in that fight. No reporter should have
Right.
a dog in the fight. No reporter should have something to gain because they wrote a story. No one should have something personally involved in it." And I got that a lot. So,
Right. And my response to that would be,
okay.
and it took, let's say, the Times-Picayune, what was it, 2 years to begin reporting in every story that that these were man-made disasters caused by
Oh,
the Army Corps?
way,
Was it about 2 years?
way longer
And
than
and,
two
and
years.
who and which was the first media outlet to report it?
Probably the New Orleans
Like
levy.
that.
Yes,
Probably the New Orleans
the New
levy.
Orleans levy, and
And I
the
exactly.
it
And
took
that,
no,
and
it
that's my
took way
point.
more than 2 years. It took more like 5 years,
That's my
and
point exactly.
and
And from day one, as soon as it happened, I mean, from my day one of publishing, I was stating that in every single satirical, fact-based news story that we wrote. I wrote that these were man-made disasters created by the Army Corps of Engineers, and I
thank you.
never
Yes,
let
you
it go.
did. And I think the second one was Clancy,
Dubo,
Clancy Dubose, who owned the very very popular magazine.
love
Okay, what was
Clancy.
it called?
Gambit.
Gambit.
The Gambit. So he issued a memo to all of his reporters that whenever you
Yes,
talk about the flooding, you call it the federal flood. And it was fairly early on. I was going to say it's about a year and a half, maybe two
yes,
years, but it took the local. I mean, sometimes the local advocate and
right.
Picayune still make that mistake. They
That's
get
right,
they
and
get called out for it, but
that's
sometimes
right.
they still make that mistake. On that,
Well, I just wanted to comment in
sure.
their defense, in defense of the Times-Picayune Advocate. We have a couple of reporters I can think of with who have dogs in the fight. They're local residents. It's Mark Schlefstein and Bob Marshall to come to mind as people with a dog in the fight who are local, who've done a great job. So there's room for both. You want the dispassionate outsider, but you don't want to foreclose on having local expertise and people like writing
Right.
a series in 2002 that basically predicted what would happen in Katrina 3 years later with the
Right.
flooding.
It was
And
1 year.
oftentimes,
It was 1 year later.
right, right.
Um, so
And oftentimes, one more quick point. And
yeah, yeah.
oftentimes, when it comes down to what a reporter writes, you still have editors who have the final say on what's
Oh
going to
yeah,
happen.
that's for sure.
And
And the
if
editors
those
also write
editors
the
have a
headline.
specific bias, and
That
at
is
the
my
Times
beef with
Picayune,
the that's my beef with the
hello,
Post right now with
cheers.
the pardon with the pardon is that it wasn't the reporters, it wasn't the
Right.
columnists. They were doing
You're
their
right.
jobs. It was the editors focusing on it to the extent that they did. And you go back to the endorsement business where the paper's editorial board, even a higher body within the paper, was overridden by the publisher and the owner.
Absolutely.
So there is a problem with the editors. We had this argument within my house about should we or should we not cancel. And I said, well, first of all, if you want to cancel the Washington Post, you better give up Amazon Prime because you really want to hurt the guy. Prime is going to have to go. So that snuffed that argument out pretty quickly. And then I've been less happy with the New York Times than I have the Post. Again, I think it's made some editorial errors, but I continue to subscribe and pay for the Times
Hmm.
because it is
Right.
these are the people with journalists on the ground. They're not
Hmm.
just repackaging things. Uh, they're not just news services. They actually have journalists and writers and reporters who are on the ground, and that is important.
Speaking of
You
on
know,
the
and
ground, you're right. I think it was you, Stuart, who said, well, these people that are on the ground, they need to be involved in these stories, and that's very true. But I'll also add that like for example, after the flooding, Mark Schlefting, Gordon Russell, Bob Marshall, Frank Donze, they had their feet were on the ground, but they were also the most exquisite experts because they are here. And
right.
and that is why, believe it or not, that's why um, levies.org has gone after them harder when they screw up because they
Yeah,
know
Absolutely.
better.
Got it.
good for
Got
They're
it.
you.
here.
That's good.
Yeah, and
So,
don't forget even the first source that you mentioned today, the lens.
mhm.
The lens really began from a woman who had no experience in journalism whatsoever,
Mhm.
and she just began writing about property issues. She started writing about disparagements about property and different things, and all of this led to the lens being created. And she was just
She was on
a
the ground with a
yes,
camera and she
yes,
was noticing all these buildings being torn down. a
Yes.
lot of them by accident, and lots of money was being made. So anyway, she uncovered that a big story about it. The story was written by
Karen Gadbois.
Karen Gadbois, and the person who brought her discovery to the attention was the Lee Zurich. And so
Absolutely.
together they launched the lens with a little help
Yes.
from George Soros.
There you
But
go.
what Karen Gadbois did was absolutely fabulous, and she's still
Heroic. It's
at it.
very much in the vein of what you did, Sandy. And I'm not saying that is patronizing. I'm saying the absolute truth. Very much in the vein of what you did
Well,
with
thank you.
levies.org. Very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you. It's people,
No, it's a
somebody
pleasure.
with no experience. How often
Absolutely.
someone with no special training are the ones that
And
are going to jump
right.
out
And
there.
you transformed yourself into an engineering expert in a lot of ways. And then Karen transformed herself into a superb journalist,
Hmm.
and both of you came from no kind of background in that realm, in those realms whatsoever. And it's pretty amazing. If I can say one thing more about media, just real quick, and the levels of media, by and large, so many of the newspapers and outlets that you're going to experience are owned by people who are pretty conservative. Okay.
Hmm.
Uh, and I'm not saying all, because you have liberal owners, you have super conservative owners, but in that middle zone, you're going to find a lot more conservative owners who are there to make money, because newspapers used to be money machines, because you had classified ads, you had all this other stuff. They used to be 40% profit margins if you were doing poorly. And what but so those guys would hire editors who were conservative based too. Now those editors would hire reporters, and generally, if you're talking about a young reporter, you're talking about someone who really wants to go get the job done and really is it might even have a little bit more liberal bents. Talking about the liberal media, you might be talking about younger reporters. But when those younger reporters turn in stories, those stories go through conservative editors by and large. So you're talking about a different kind of level of editing and presentation a lot of times, from your copy editors all the way up through your senior editors. So I mean, you can't really always just say, to blanket anything as media is liberal or media is conservative or whatever. I mean, I think we've seen too many instances where it's just it's all over the place right now. But that
Yeah, I
is
agree with
generally.
to your point, Rudy. The Washington Post was purchased by a guy who made a fortune in capitalism. He's a capitalist, and by nature is going to be conservative. Jeff Bezos. I don't know that much about his politics, but rest assured, if it affects his business,
Right.
if it's taxes, for
Hmm.
example,
Hmm.
he's got a vested interest in that. Advocate, John George's family, very profit oriented, uh, great people, but conservative. So these flavors do filter down. It does, as you say, the work that goes upstream from the sources, from the reporters, and even the opinion editors or opinion writers. When it gets to the editors, I think it is shaped, and I think it does. We have less of a liberal media than we used to.
Yeah, I
Agreed.
think that's very true. Very
The
true. I
the
agree.
only thing I can think to add on this is that it's the editors who are the conservative ones who write the headlines. And
Oh,
if I
that's
could have a nickel for
That's true.
every time I saw a
yes,
headline that bore all little resemblance to what was in the actual story,
yes.
little to no resemblance, way more often than it should. Well, it's about time to wrap up this episode about President Biden's pardon of his son Hunter. So, before we sign off, is there anything last you'd like to say before we sign off on that subject?
Well, I would like a blanket pardon for the last, I'm going to go 20, 25 years. So I'll throw that out there before the end of the administration. Thank you.
Thank you. And you, how about you, Stuart?
Are there any pardons for school zone traffic cameras? Because I could use a blanket pardon
Oh,
there.
those are the worst. I have almost no tickets, but the ones that I have
Good for you.
Our
Are
schools are.
well earned.
Yeah. I don't drive fast. I don't even like to drive. So,
Is
well,
24 fast? I don't think so, but
no,
go ahead.
no. So, thank you, Rudy, for joining us. Thank you, Stuart, for joining us. And thank you, the listeners, also for joining us. We hope you like this episode. Please like, subscribe, and rate the podcast, The Slingshot from Levies.org, on all of your favorite platforms. And we'll see you next time. Okay. So I'm wondering if I should stop recording this and then start a new one.
Hold on. Let me get my charger. Have to,
Okay.
I was
I think I'm
running
just going
on
to
literally, I was at 2% power. I forgot to
Okay, go
put my
ahead.
power cord in my.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what Landry wanted me to do, if I have him send him a whole show at once or to start it and restart it. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make an executive decision since this file is going to get huge.
Yeah.
Okay.
Start over.
I think I'm just going to stop it and then restart. Okay.
Okay.
Great.
I just need to, I think you can use the same link. But when you, no, let me write a new link. Okay. First of all, let me stop recording this.